Alien abduction. For 1 second, imagine being forcefully taken against your will to be subjected to terrifying, unworldly experiments on board an alien spacecraft. Feeling scared, disorientated, the furthest out of your comfort zone you could ever get, enough to reduce any grown man to tears. Hard to imagine, right? But believe it or not, for some of us out there, imagining is a thing of the past. Today, hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people across the world have been in some way a part of this phenomenon. Some with partial memories, some with no recollection of anything, some with implants, some with scars, and some with fully conscious memories of the full-blown abduction. Every abduction story is unique in its own way. Just like snowflakes, they have their similarities, but no two are alike. Each one giving different details and information on how they were abducted and for what purpose. Though the majority of abduction cases out there are fascinating in their own way, there are some that stand out from the crowd in remarkable ways. The abduction of Jesse Long starts way back in 1957 in a small village in Upper East Tennessee when Jesse was just 5 years old. It takes a real significant event to stick in your mind from such a young age, and the significant event above all levels is exactly what happened to Jesse. According to what he remembers, Jesse and his brother were out exploring the hills around his house, where they came across what seemed to be a silver circular house under construction. A few moments later, he was approached by a tall humanoid figure wielding a long rod in his hands. A bright, blinding light was emitted, and that's where Jesse's memory of the event fades out. But using hypnotism to look into Jesse's past, we are able to receive a glimpse of the horrifying, bone-chilling events of what happened that day.
He says it's only through hypnosis that he's been able to remember the rest of this first abduction. What you are seeing is actual footage of Jesse undergoing hypnotic regression.
You will not be able
In the hypnosis video just seen, Jesse claims that ETs were inserting a small implant into his lower left shin. Jesse was always able to feel the uncomfortableness of the implant underneath his skin, and in 1991, 31 years later, physical evidence of the implant was removed from Jesse's leg. Immediate tests were run on the apparent alien object, and the results from the examination baffled the materials analysis team. To quote from the materials analysis experts, the object revealed a very remarkable composition and possessed unique surface characteristics that cannot be explained. And the questions outnumbered the answers. Foreign implants were just one of the numerous procedures Jesse had forced upon him whilst in the alien operating theatre. He also speaks of semen extraction and being made to crossbreed with what seemed to be female ETs. Nobody knows the outcome of interspecies sexual contact better than Jesse Long. But by the distressed look in his eyes in this next video, nothing hit him quite as hard as this.
He was taken aboard the craft, placed on a table. I was presented with a baby, was told, "This is your child." And there were 9 other children standing along the wall. They all looked at me, and I could see, yes, they were mine. Each of the children who were standing along the wall walked up to me lying on the table, and they each touched my hand as they walked by and looked me straight in the eyes, and they walked on out of the room.
Jesse Long, a man that has seen basically every situation an alien abduction has to offer. But a case doesn't have to be popular or well known to be jaw-dropping in its own way. The abduction case of a man from Eugene, Oregon named Len begins way back in 1991 when Len was just a young boy at 7 years of age. Len had been given permission by his dad that he could accompany his older sister on her early morning paper route around an area called Fox Hollow in the region. Before they both ventured out, Len's sister informs him of strange gigantic objects drifting around in the night skies. We pick up the story where Len encounters his first UFO. It is 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning in Eugene, Oregon, and Len and his sister have just begun to deliver the morning's first stack of fresh papers.
It's 33rd Street, it's called. 33rd or 34th, I think it's 33rd Street. And as soon as I stepped off the curb onto the road, I heard what sounded like a giant fire extinguisher in the sky, really close to the ground. And it sounded like this. And it startled me, I grabbed my bag and I looked up in the sky and I said, well, what's that? And my sister said, I told you, Lynn, there are things in the sky. And I remember my sister started walking up this road, pitch black. And I was looking at the back of her as she walked up this road. And I heard a voice come inside my head. And it said, now's the time. And I remember looking around like, oh, that's weird. I heard a voice in my head, and all of a sudden I started to run towards the peak of this mountain, and I'm running towards it. And I do notice 3 beings. They're green. They have big black eyes, the typical, and I was scared. I was terrified. And a voice inside my head said, yes, get over here now. And that just shocked the sense of security out of me. And as I ran up to them, I ran all the way up to them, and they didn't look down at me or anything. They just continued to walk up this forest on the trail, and I don't remember anything past that.
That was just touching on Len's first extraterrestrial experience. Many years passed, and Len's interaction with ETs were just long ago memories, pushed into the back of his mind and basically forgotten about. But what Len thought he had escaped all came flooding back in the year of 2008. Len was now around the age of 24. He was living in a small apartment with his fiancée and his newly born son. It's late at night, and Len is the only person still awake in his apartment.
It was about midnight. And all of a sudden, guys, I never had this happen before in my life, but I got the strangest feeling like I was being watched. My body started to tingle. I actually had a physical reaction. I felt a very strong tingly sensation in my hips going down my legs, and I began to walk into the living room where our bed and my son's crib was, and standing, I'm telling you the truth, I saw this black shadow figure. It was, I'd say, maybe around 6 feet tall or less, but around there, maybe 6 feet tall, and it was just a black shadow figure. I know all of you are well aware of the cartoon figure, the Grim Reaper. He's got, a big black robe on, and the hood falls extra wide to the shoulders, and there was no staff. He wasn't holding a staff. He just kind of had his arms folded like this down by his belly, and the thing was definitely looking down at my son in his crib. I just stood there frozen, for a good couple seconds. I didn't even know. I couldn't think. All I could do was look. And it was definitely looking down at my son. And that's when it had turned around. It had turned around, and it didn't turn around towards me where like I could get a look at its face possibly underneath its hood. It had turned the other way, and then it had hovered all the way across the living room floor, which is a good solid 15 feet at least, and vanished into the wall.
The strange paranormal events continued, changing and getting more frequent as the months went by.
I had woken up, and I was lying in my bed, and it was late. It was like maybe 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, somewhere around there. And I'd actually put in earplugs in my ears, because when he wakes up, we live in a very small apartment, and they make a lot of noise, and so it was just best if I wore earplugs. That's when I heard this come from the back of my head. I heard this. Boop, boop. there was a static noise with 2 simultaneous beeps and another static noise. It was like a transmission. And instantly I sprung out of my bed. I looked underneath my pillow. I had known that had came from the back of my head, but I needed to look for a phone. I needed to look for something that would have made that noise.
A few months after the noises from the back of Len's head, the flashbacks began. The flashbacks went back to when Len was 7, and they seemed to rebuild the time and pieces of memory Len had lost during the paper route.
This was my very first ever flashback of my life, and it was so real. Instantly, I wasn't even in my living room anymore. I wasn't even in my house anymore. It was middle of the night. I'm walking away from this object, and I'm turning around. I'm looking over my left shoulder, and I'm definitely looking at a silver flying saucer. Typical flying saucer. There was no bolts. There was no windows that I could see in this flashback. It had a ramp coming down. The carpet was maroon. There were no lights. Door opens, and there's a woman there in what looks like a hospital bed. If you have ever had a wife give birth, she was like in a hospital bed, and she had blonde hair. She was an older woman, maybe around her 30s, you know. And I remember there was something in front of her, having intercourse with her. And I remember standing up real close to this copper-looking ET with the black eyes, you know, and it was in a bed. It was in a hospital bed-like bed, and I was up real close to it, and I remember just getting the feeling like I knew what. This is weird. I'm just gonna say it really quickly. I felt like I knew what we had done, that we had made a baby or something. All of a sudden I flashed out of it, and that's when I knew, that's ultimately when I knew that this was what it was. And I ran into my bathroom, I started to cry, and it was an alien abduction.
As you've just heard, Len also had a strong sense that he was being used to create an alien-human hybrid race, just like in the Jesse Long case. I have recently been in contact with Len, and he explained how the visitations are still frequently occurring, and it's not just him they're focusing their attention on. His young son of around 3 to 4 years of age speaks of being visited by monsters accompanied by a saucer late in the night. As Len states in the video, he has no reason to lie, twist the truth, or make up anything he has just explained. He has nothing to gain or lose, just an ordinary guy sharing his extraordinary experiences. You don't have to be an expert in the alien abduction field to have heard of the next case. Branded the best documented case of alien abduction, the story of Travis Walton has to be the holy grail of all abduction cases. The evidence, the witnesses, the authenticness of it, you just can't make this stuff up. At the time, Travis was 22 years old, living and working in the state of Arizona. He was working for the United States Forest Service and was on the way back home from work when the whole scenario took place. Travis and his work colleagues, who were also his out-of-work friends, were on their way back to their hometown of Snowflake after a long day's work in the forest. Just after 6 p.m, Travis and his crew noticed a bright white disc hovering over a wooded hill in the distance. Baffled by what they were witnessing, Mike Rogers, who was driving the pickup truck at the time, pulled over next to the object for a closer inspection. Travis was scared, but thinking the light would have took off as soon as it was detected, Travis hopped out of the truck and ran towards it for the best possible view. When Travis was virtually underneath the disc, it started swaying from side to side and began making a noise that could only be described as a loud turbine. Even more feared by this, Travis had decided that that was enough and began to make an approach back to the truck. Then, without warning, he was suddenly struck in the chest by an almighty beam of white light and tossed a good 10 to 15 foot away from the craft, hitting the floor completely limp. Convinced no human could have survived what they had just witnessed, Rogers reversed the truck back and sped out of the area as fast as the truck would go. They were barely a quarter of a mile away when Rogers hit the brakes and came to his senses and realised he had just left his friend in a very dangerous and very scary situation in the middle of nowhere with no help. Against the other crew members in the truck's wishes, he turned back around in a desperate attempt to locate and save Travis from whatever had attacked him. When they arrived back at the scene, the craft had vanished. The men conducted a search in the woods stretching out over half an hour trying to find Travis's body, but Travis was nowhere to be found. When getting back to their town, the first thing the men did was contact the authorities to inform them of what had happened. The sheriff believed them to some extent and decided to go up to the location in the morning with the men and some of the police force for a second search of the area. Some of the men were so shaken by what had happened, they had absolutely no intention of going back with the police to search the area in the morning. Finding no proof or strong evidence to back up what the men were saying, the police dismissed the story as a ludicrous lie and suspected the men had killed Travis and tried to cover it up with a ridiculous story. A lie detector test was suggested, and each man was so certain that what they had seen out in the forest was the 100% truth, they jumped at a chance to prove their innocence and show them what they were saying was nothing but the truth. It was the first time the lie detector examiner had such a large group of people to work on concerning the same event. 2 days after the tests, the men were presented with the results. Quoted from the lie detector examiner's official results, the report says, "The findings positively proved the men did see something that they believed was a UFO. This was solid evidence that the men had seen something that night, and 5 days after Travis's disappearance, the best proof possible was recovered. Travis Walton was back." Travis was picked up only a couple of miles away from the area he went missing. He said he woke up next to a road and contacted for help from a gas station further along the same road. Travis's return made headline news. Everybody wanted to know what had happened and where had he been. Travis says the first thing he remembers after the beam of light striking his chest was waking up in a bright white pristine room, experiencing extreme pain in his upper body area. When he was nearly fully conscious and was able to glance around the room, he says the first thing he noticed was strange otherworldly faces looking down at him.
It was the most terrifying sight of my life. They were sort of human-like in form, 2 arms and 2 legs and like that, the human arrangement of features, but they were definitely not human. The eyes, they just seemed to look right into me. There was a sort of an indifference there that I found very frightening.
Travis jumped up and screamed for the beings to get out of the room whilst holding an instrument he had picked up off a nearby surface.
I was screaming all sorts of threats at them, and I was prepared to, fight my way past them to escape.
Travis was then moved to a blacked out dome room with stars dotted around the walls. There was a chair positioned in the centre, and when Travis experimented with some of the buttons on the chair, the stars began to move around him, as if he was in control of the craft. What seemed to be a human with long blonde hair and blue eyes soon entered the room and led Travis to some form of alien hangar where he came into contact with similar beings. One of the last things Travis remembers thinking is, "My God, the sweet Earth could be millions of miles away." Despite the abduction happening over 35 years ago, none of the men's details on the events have changed or been altered in any way. Even when being offered large cash sums for someone to confess, no man has yet come forward and the story has stayed the same. With many skeptics saying the whole thing was a planned hoax for attention and money, the other men and Travis strongly disagree.
The net effect financially has been negative. The net effect on my life has been negative. I do not enjoy the attention or the notoriety. I just wish it had never happened.
In my opinion, this next story is the most jaw-droppingly brilliant abduction case ever documented in abduction history. What separates this one from the others is the vivid detail that is remembered from each abduction. because the man who experienced these abductions was virtually 100% conscious throughout countless visitations. This is the case of Jim Sparks. Before the visitations began, Jim had literally no care or interest in anything to do with the issue of space or extraterrestrial beings. He had no attraction to science fiction films, books, TV or radio shows, and held little to no knowledge on the subject. Jim was virtually untainted by the world's depiction of ETs, so what he saw was solely through his eyes and had no influence by the world's media. At the time, Jim was 34 years of age, living in North Carolina. Jim had a successful land development business, a wife, many close friends and family, and an all-around beautiful life. But things took a very bizarre paranormal turn, starting one night in the middle of 1988, entering his life in the form of dreams.
In mid-88, I was having the same reoccurring dream. I consider myself to be normal, honest, logical, straightforward. And this dream that I was having was that something or some things was coming into my bedroom, escorted me off the bed, down the hallway, into the guest room. It was always the same thing. Walking me through the guest room window, which was a ground floor window. Of course, you know it's got to be a dream, at least in my mind it was. And into the woods. Then back across from the woods, back across our lawn, through the window, and back in bed. And this was happening several times a week, week after week, in the first couple of months. And then one particular evening, this dream became extremely vivid, meaning that I became conscious during the course of it, wide awake as like we're sitting here right now. When they escorted me into the guest bedroom, the normal part of this dream was to walk me through the window, and I was thinking, oh my God, how are we going to walk through this window? We walked through the window, they went out into the woods, I had no memory of what happened, and they walked me back the same way. On our lawn at that time, we had thousands of what I call honeysuckle flowers that would stick to the bottom of your feet. After that experience, when I got up in the morning, I went into the guest bedroom, and what I saw shocked me, and I knew something really strange was happening because you could see my footprints in the lawn, and embedded in the footprints, you could see the heel embedded into the lawn on one side of the window, and then on the other side of the window you could see my toes and the ball of my feet embedded into the carpet. However, the honeysuckle flowers were embedded into the carpet also. So as each footstep went further into the guest bedroom, you could see my footprints with the flowers stuck in them. And then also you could see tiny little feet, which were the little worker things, with flowers in those. So that freaked me out. I knew something weird was really going on.
But that wasn't the only method the ETs could use on getting Jim inside their craft. Being walked through the house, down the garden and through the forest is what Jim calls the easy way of being abducted. The hard way involves the alien craft transporting you into it whilst it's in motion. Jim explains this as being one of the most terrifying experiences he's ever been subjected to in his whole life.
I call that method of transport going the easy way. The hard way from point A to point B was what was totally gut-wrenching. For me, the first thing you hear, you could be laying in bed or you can be sitting in the living room, whatever the case may be, is you start to hear this whirling, whipping sound inside your head at a low RPM. It starts getting louder and louder and faster. The RPMs start to increase. The next thing that happens is you feel a sensation in the pit of your stomach, and it starts working its way up to your upper torso, and when it reaches your heart starts racing at like 1,000 miles an hour. Da, 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 da. So you think like, my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. The sound gets louder, the RPMs increase, your respiration increases even more, and then the next sensation is an acceleration. Only instead of feeling like you're being pulled up, you feel like you're being pulled down. And it's the best way I can describe it would be like you're going down a roller coaster only 100 times faster. Now you're paralyzed at that point, you can't see, you're screaming inside your head because you can't move your mouth, I don't want to die, and then boom, you black out.
But what really freaked Jim out and and really changed his life for a solid 18 months to 6 years, with the terrifying procedures he remembers flawlessly conducted upon him up to 15 times a month inside the alien spacecraft.
When I became conscious, I was at point B. Now here's where point B was for this person for 6 years, at least. In this room, on board this craft, and I found myself in the same place every time for those first 6 years, sitting on this bench, and in front of this bench was a table, I call it a screen table, and it was artificial intelligence, and I think, and now we're talking almost 20 years ago, it was a teaching machine. It read you, it knew you, it got to know you. That was just the beginning of the fun. About 5 or 8 feet in front of that table was a wall which had a screen on it. I was paralyzed with the exception of the fact that I could move my head up and I could move my head down to see that screen on the screen table, and I could move my head up to see anything that was going on the screen on the wall, and my right hand and arm were resting up against the table and wrist where I can move my right forefinger as if you're doing something like an Etch-a-Sketch when you were a kid. And however, any mark or stroke I would make would either show up on that screen or it would on the screen table, or it would show up on that wall. Now, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know why I was there. I didn't know what was going on. My wife thought I lost my mind. When I went to my friends, they said, Jim's a pretty normal, honest person, but I think he's lost it. At that time, I went to the church. I used to go to church a lot. When I went to the church with it, they said it was demonic. My family figured I lost it. Now, this stuff went on for a period of 2 to 3 times a week, every week. Sometimes it would be, weeks would be 9 or 10 times a month. Sometimes it would be 15 times a month, and that went on heavy like that the first 18 months. And every time I was pulled, I was sitting in that same stupid bench in that same stupid place, tracing block letters to a symbolic equivalency, and I thought this thing was an alien alphabet. And an alien symbolic equivalency turned out to be one of the most fascinating things that one could ever experience. They presented 50 pages of text on this screen, and it was a story about a friend of mine, and his name was Jerry, and it was written where I could read it. So I started, as I could read one page in regular writing, is where Jerry was born and how he was raised and his likes and his dislikes, and as a toddler growing into puberty, and it went page after page after page, and then when it came to the point of the present, the story kept reading as if into the future. And so at the end of those 50 pages, I said, why are you doing this? What is your point with this? Well, then, after I said that, they took on that screen and put about a paragraph, less than a half a page, of that symbolic stuff that they had converted, and I could read it real fast, and I got the whole story within a matter of a minute. And I went, wow. Okay, now, this took years to even get to the point as to why they were pulling this. Now, this got even better. They then came out with something that looked like the size of a 50-cent piece coin, and then it was like a shorthand version of these symbols, and they flashed the coin. It wasn't a coin, but it was round like that with the symbols in it. You look at it, and then you got the whole story in a split second.
After a short while, Jimmy decided to take a new approach to avoid the abductions from taking place. He figured maybe if he rapidly changed his whereabouts on a daily basis, maybe the ETs wouldn't be able to pinpoint his location.
I also figured in those early months, and particularly within those first 18 months as being the biggest hell of the 6 years, of me trying to avoid these guys or to get away from these beings. For example, I would go to major cities, and I would go downtown, and I would check out a hotel that was 15, 20 stories, and I'd get in the middle of it thinking they couldn't pull me. They would pull me. I would drive hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles from state to state to state to try and get away from these guys. They would pull me. So there was really no escaping. To inevitably, it came to the point where I abandoned my home in Texas, and I went down to Fort Myers Beach, Florida, which was a sterile island where I grew up, to see if I can get away from them that way, and of course, no, they still pulled me.
Just like in 90% of every recorded male abduction cases out there, sperm extraction was a standard part of every visitation.
Now, you must know that during every abduction, we have to extract semen. Okay, we have to do that. That's a must. However, on one particular occasion, here I was on this metal gurney, but I was laying on the gurney, but I had some ability to move, which was rather rare. But there was a worker beam on my right, there was a worker beam on my left, there was a gray, which had this apparatus on my groin, and I responded by, like a knee jerk, and I just shoved him with my foot, and I kicked him back. And he fell back, and I said, oh my God, what's he going to do now? He gets up, and he comes really fast, right up to my face, just like an inch to my face, and I'll never forget those eyes, and I'll never forget that face being that close. He transmitted 100 thoughts, approximately, and 100 emotions in a second. If I can slow them down, they went just like this. Why did you kick me? You know you shouldn't kick me. It's bad to kick me. I could hurt you. I can do a lot of harm to you. You shouldn't kick me. And you get all the emotions of each one of those things, only he did it within a second, and it just went, and I couldn't handle all of that, and I just passed out.
After being with him for so long, Jim felt as the ETs had developed a large amount of trust in him. He says they began by slowly enabling different parts of his body to function freely. When he showed he could be trusted to walk around by free will, is when Jim says he witnessed one of the most unforgettably stunning abduction events he's ever been a part of.
One of the most astounding and notable abduction experiences where I started to see a pretty big picture. I got pulled, and I found myself in a clearing in the woods. I would say the clearing was about 100 yards, like the size of a football field. I was standing up, and below me was, and I had free and total movement. Below me was about 12 or 15 people just sprawled all over the ground. They were in their night clothes or nude, so you could see that they were pulled. I use the term pulled instead of abducted a lot, so meaning taking you from point A to point B. You could see they were pulled from their homes or in their bedrooms. The left of that group was another pile of people, about 12 or 15 of them. And then to the left of that pile was another pile of people, just sprawl out on the ground. So here's 3 piles of people, and in each pile was a gray. Then I started hearing moaning and groaning from these people that were on the ground, as if they knew something was going to happen, and to my left, in the horizon, were 3 balls of light. And out of nowhere, one of them just went zoop across the sky, right on top of our pile of people, above the clouds. The second one went over it fast from the horizon over the second group of pile of people, and the third one hung over the third pile of people. The one that where I was standing, I was looking up because I could see the glow of the light, but I couldn't make out what it was. And then it started descending from the clouds. And I saw what I thought and felt was the most majestic, spectacular, phenomenal sight of my life. I mean, it had my heart beating like with excitement. It didn't look like I thought a UFO should look like. I figured those things would be more aerodynamic, and it looked kind of like unaerodynamic. But nonetheless, it was spherical. It did have a dome on the top, but the bottom of it was like egg-shelled. And then I could see windows around that eggshell part, and I can see the silhouette of beings scurrying around. Then this bright, bright white light emanated from that eggshell-looking thing over our group of people and myself with a hue of blue. And it was just simply beautiful. So I started walking forward, and I had my hands up in the air, and I was going, "It's beautiful! It's beautiful!" And then another one came over, the one that was over the second group descended from the clouds, and that light came down. And then the third one did the same thing. So when I was standing there and seeing these 3 things, and I was so taken by it, I was just yelling out, "They're beautiful!" And then something occurred to my mind to do little symbol thing that I learned, a symbol for high. I'm so, with it. So I do a thing for high, and as soon as I did that instantly, which was like this, I blacked out.
Jim awoke in a room inside of the spacecraft that he describes as a large gymnasium filled with monitors, and after the terrifying, fearful events that had filled the past 12 years of his life, he was presented with a slight answer as to why they were doing this.
When I regained consciousness, I was sitting in front of this, my monitor, and there were nothing but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people sitting in front of monitors also. They either had a line that was hooked into their forearms, the back of their forearms, or the bottom of their forearms, which I think can explain in a sense what scoop marks are put in there, and then some of them had lines in their calves, the back, behind your shin, yeah, your calf. And what I learned that to be, which I'm pretty certain what that was about, was we were all about to get an environmental lesson in this mass abduction, which has been going on a global basis. And also different things that you can do, which I'm going to get into that in a second. What these tubes were that were stuck in us, I believe, were something to heighten the emotions to an extreme. Meaning that all these monitors all lit up at the same time. And you could tell, and I always describe it this way, like at a television shop when you see like 50 TVs and they all go on at the same time, that glow in the room, all of that's the same. So all these monitors light up at the same time, and there's a scene appears. The first scene that shows up was an Earth, they're all Earth scenes, was the ocean. It was a beautiful, drop-dead gorgeous, turquoise blue, fresh, teeming with fish, and you could see the sky was crystal clear. And with whatever they had hooked into us, and the way the colors were coming through on this site, you just went, oh my God. It just took your breath away. You're going, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It just overwhelmed you with the pristine beauty of the planet. And then it was one beautiful Earth scene after the other, after the other, after the other. And then they slowly started getting ugly. Where the beautiful ocean was a mousy, nasty brown. The fish were bloated and floating in the water. The air was, or the sky was a nasty color, and you were just going, oh God, no, I don't want to see that. And each scene got uglier and uglier. And then the telepathic voice in everybody's head, all at the same time as these scenes were getting uglier, were, you're killing your planet. Your planet is dying. You're killing your planet. Your planet is dying. So they let us see all this wondrous beauty of what it was like, and then did a reverse emotional thing with whatever was hooked up us, and you're just like, oh my God, I can't take this. And I didn't want to take it, so I saw on the bottom left-hand side of my monitor symbols that were part of a filing system for these scenes. So I didn't want to look at that, so I kept looking at those to see if I can decipher it. And then the sound no came into my head, and on my screen was an N and an O. It wasn't even the alien symbolic form of no. No. And then I kept looking at it, no, and it kept appearing, and I blacked out.
To this day, Jim is still being subjected to alien abductions, but on a much smaller basis, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, if that. Such an indescribable case with such vivid detail. The 4 cases you've just watched are, in my and many other people's opinion, the most incredible alien abduction stories ever documented. The depth and the level of detail of which each story goes into is simply amazing. It is a very strong claim to make that all these people and many others like them in the world are lying. The mountains of evidence and information each case provides are outstanding, and if any of these cases turn out to be some sort of elaborate hoax, the abductees should be presented with an Oscar for their acting skills, because I've never seen a performance like it. The majority of these people receive zero or a very little amount of profit from their claims. They are fully aware that they are at risk of being deemed as crazy and outcasted by the people that love and care for them most. alien abduction is a very hard thing to admit to for no personal gain. If you didn't believe in alien abductions before watching this, I hope this video has opened your mind and helped to alter your opinion on the subject.
You know, it's not my job to convince anybody. It's my job just to tell you what I've experienced. If you believe it, fine. If you don't believe it, I don't care.
I want to get out there. I'm not doing this for attention. I'm not doing this. I'm not crazy.
Accepting it yourself is one thing. Explaining it to others is another. Right.
This happened. If you believe it, that's all right. If you don't believe it, I don't care. I don't care, because it did.